Okay, so welcome to this next video in which we are discussing angiogenesis in chronic inflammation. Okay, so we've now discussed the immune reaction, basically. Now, we've discussed that at the site of infection, you're going to get the recruitment of neutrophils, the recruitment of macrophages, and also the production of an inflammatory exudate containing complement proteins and coagulation factors. And all of that will come from the innate immune response, or the acute inflammatory response. We've also discussed that because of the adaptive immune response, you're going to get the recruitment of T helper 1 cells, T helper 2 cells, and cytotoxic T cells potentially. Not necessarily all three of them in a single immune response, but different ones depending on which pathogen you're dealing with. Okay, and they will be coming into the affected area as well. Right, so what can happen is that they can be successful. They can destroy the pathogen. However, occasionally what can happen is that they fail to destroy it. And then what starts to happen is you just get this continuous process of bringing in more and more white blood cells, more and more leukocytes into the area, and this is what's known as chronic inflammation. When this process just continues on, and you just are failing to clear the pathogen, this is when it becomes a chronic process. And one of the hallmarks of chronic inflammation is what's known as angiogenesis. Okay, so finally, in the 7th video, we are actually going to get to discuss what angiogenesis is. So, firstly, one of the things I just want to clear up is the difference between angiogenesis and vasculogenesis, because these two things should not be confused. Angiogenesis means creating blood vessels from existing blood vessels. Okay, so what you do is you already have one blood vessel here, and we'll just draw this blood vessel as a tube. And in angiogenesis, what's going to happen is you're going to start budding off a new blood vessel off this one that already exists. So you're going to produce a bud like that, and it will grow basically, so it'll get longer and longer and longer. And it's basically the formation of a new blood vessel as an extension of an old blood vessel. Okay, whereas vasculogenesis is something which happens in embryology basically, and not in the adult human. So vasculogenesis, this is where mesenchymal cells actually differentiate into blood vessels basically. Okay, so let me show this. So what's going to happen is you're actually going to just take a bunch of cells, and those are going to form a blood vessel. Okay, so very simply I'll show it like this. So it's the formation of blood vessels from scratch basically. So you're not starting with a blood vessel, you're starting just with a bunch of cells, and they're going to start making a blood vessel. So angiogenesis is not the same thing as vasculogenesis. Vasculogenesis is something of fascination to developmental biologists. Angiogenesis is something that's of fascination to pathologists and pharmacologists and physiologists. Okay, right. So, we're going to discuss how in chronic inflammation you get the development of new blood vessels in the area where the chronic inflammation is occurring. Okay, now why would you want this? Well, the reason you want it is to get increased blood flow to that affected area. Now, why do you want increased blood flow? Well, because you just want more and more leukocytes and also proteins from the blood to come in, because you're losing this war, is what you have to understand. In chronic inflammation, you are failing to win this war basically. It's like going on and on and on and on, and loads of cells are dying continuously. So basically what you're trying to do is bring in a greater number of cells, and for that, one of the things that you could do is increase the number of blood vessels that there are supplying that area, which would lead to increased leukocytes being recruited from the blood, those increased blood vessels. into the interstitial space. In addition, it would also bring in extra protein from the blood, so complement proteins and coagulation factors. So those are the benefits of creating new blood vessels. What we're now going to look at is how does the process happen? How do you induce angiogenesis in these endothelial cells? Okay, so let's begin then. So we'll start by discussing which blood vessel this is actually going to happen in. So it's going to happen in our post-capillary venules. Okay, so in this type of blood vessel here. And basically what has to happen is these cells have to start dividing. So let me draw a picture. Okay, so if we imagine looking at the cross-section now. Okay, so if here we have an endothelial cell, so I'll draw the post-capillary venule again. So here is an endothelial cell. Here is another endothelial cell. Okay, and they make up the circumference of the endothelium of this post-capillary venule. Okay, here's another endothelial cell. Here's another endothelial cell, and then I think we can just squeeze one more in there. Not really a squeeze, but never mind. Okay, so here's another endothelial cell. And of course, they have opened these gaps between themselves in, of course, this chronically inflamed tissue. But we'll just ignore that fact at the moment, okay, so that I can show you the process of angiogenesis. So basically what needs to happen is these endothelial cells need to divide, and they need to start producing an extension of a bud. So what you need to do is you need to go from this to this, and I'll just draw this sort of end bit here. So here is this endothelial cell that was previously here, and here is this endothelial cell that was previously here. And basically you need to produce more endothelial cells. So basically it's the endothelial cells growing that produces this, basically. Okay, so you need to induce growth within the endothelial cells, and here is another endothelial cell. Okay, so you need to create this bud off the edge of this post-capillary venule, and if I just complete it by drawing these other endothelial cells that were initially here. Okay, now what we're going to discuss now is where the induction signals for this process come from. And they come basically from all of the leukocytes that you have recruited into the interstitial space that are losing this battle, basically. So when it becomes apparent that the battle is not, that we're not clearing this infection, what's going to happen is that these cells, these leukocytes, are going to start releasing angiogenic factors, which are going to cause the endothelial cells to divide and grow out towards the source of the angiogenic factors. Okay, so basically the angiogenic factors will be coming from over here. So let me just add on the basement membrane here. And obviously you're also going to have to get reshaping of the basement membrane in order for this process to occur. Okay, but the important thing is the growth of the endothelial cells. Everything follows that. Okay, so we're going to look, for the rest of this video, what we're going to look at is these angiogenic factors and their signaling pathways within the endothelial cells. Okay, so we're going to discuss two important angiogenic factors, and they are the vascular endothelial derived growth factor. Vascular endothelial growth factor A, and also the fibroblast growth factor 2. Okay, so basically these two angiogenic factors are going to be released by T cells and also by macrophages. So let's draw this happening. So here is our T lymphocyte, whether it's a cytotoxic T lymphocyte or a T helper 1 cell or a T helper 2 cell. Here it is, and they have this very characteristic, very large nucleus. So this is a T lymphocyte, and that's just a long name for a T cell. Okay, they're called lymphocytes because they're within the lymph nodes. Okay, and then we'll have our macrophage here. So these two types of cell, they basically start releasing angiogenic factors, and there are many of these angiogenic factors that are known, but the two main ones that we're going to look at are known as vascular endothelium growth factor, and I'm sorry that I'm trying to say derived. I'm thinking of platelet-derived growth factor. No, this is vascular endothelial growth factor A. Okay, specifically the A type is one of the most important. Okay, so this is vascular endothelial growth factor, and this tells you exactly what it's going to act on. It's going to act on the vascular endothelium, and it's going to cause growth within the vascular endothelium. Growth factor A. Okay, and they're also going to start producing fibroblast growth factor 2, okay, which is abbreviated to FGF2 for short. So this stands for fibroblast growth factor 2. Okay, now these two angiogenic factors are going to diffuse from the T cells and macrophages which created them to the endothelial cells, and there they are going to act on receptors that are on the surface of the endothelial cells. So let's now look at these receptors that are on the surface of the endothelial cells. Okay, so the receptors for vascular endothelial growth factor A and fibroblast growth factor 2 are both what are known as receptor tyrosine kinases. So I'll write that somewhere. Okay, so this is a type of receptor that works by having an intracellular tyrosine kinase, which when the ligand binds to the receptor is going to activate the intracellular receptor tyrosine kinase, which will then cause intracellular changes, which we'll see in a moment. So receptor tyrosine kinases, okay, and receptor tyrosine kinases are often abbreviated to RTKs for short, so you'll see that abbreviation made a lot. Okay, right, so let's now have a look at the structure of the receptors for vascular endothelial growth factor A and fibroblast growth factor 2. Okay, so basically the receptor for vascular endothelial growth factor A is what's known as VEGF receptor 2. Okay, this is the main receptor for vascular endothelial growth factor, and it's abbreviated to VEGFR2. So this stands for vascular endothelial growth factor receptor 2. And I should mention that there are many different types of vascular endothelial growth factor, firstly, and there are also many different types of vascular endothelial growth factor receptor. Now, the other two types of vascular endothelial growth factor receptor are pretty much trivial. The first type doesn't really do much, and the third type doesn't really do much as far as downstream signaling pathways are concerned. In fact, the first type is thought to just be like a dummy receptor, so it binds to the vascular endothelial growth factor but doesn't do anything with it, and just is therefore stopping it from interacting with a receptor that actually does anything. So if a cell doesn't want to be stimulated by vascular endothelial growth factor, then it could put on its surface the vascular endothelial growth factor receptor 1, and that would basically sequester all of the vascular endothelial growth factor and stop it from actually stimulating the vascular endothelial growth factor receptor 2. Okay, and similarly, the other vascular endothelial growth factors aren't as important as the vascular endothelial growth factor A. So, we will continue this discussion in the next video, where we'll discuss the structure of this receptor, and then we'll talk about the structure of the receptor for fibroblast growth factor.